would you take 3 linebackers or 3 running backs in this class? Knowing that you didn't get 2 running backs in the last class, let alone that one of them wasn't Jace McClellan. But also, like, it's not as if you're thin at linebacker, but you would love to see a little bit more competition, especially knowing that Caleb Kelly is gone and Deshaun White with a good season could be gone as well.
It's a really tough question to ask, and it's also interesting because the running back that Oklahoma was incredibly involved in 2022 in Raleek Brown,
right,
to me, isn't just the true lone running back. Like, that's a guy you want to play all over the field just to capitalize on his natural ability. And so for that reason, given how important it is to have depth at that position of running back, and we've seen it literally with our own eyes, I wouldn't blame that staff if they try and take 3 running backs, especially because in the class beforehand, they have some guys who could play linebacker, edge rusher. They took 3 guys that I think that could really be versatile on that side of the ball. And so when you identify it, and especially what it means in Lincoln Riley's offense, if I have the opportunity to take a Camar Wheaton and then maybe an LJ Johnson, I mean, just the list goes on and on.
Right.
I don't see why you wouldn't do it, especially because of how big of a need that is, not only in a recruiting class, but in an offensive system and on the field. I mean, it didn't take much for those injuries to start mounting up for everyone in Oklahoma football fandom to say, oh, man, we may need a couple more bodies in that RB room. So I would lean that direction at this stage, especially because, like, Brendan Walker, Shane Witter, I know that the guys in the class before could probably make up for some of the depth issues there, but I don't know that they don't necessarily have a guy that can sub in that running back room moving forward.
Right, and I think for the first time you saw Oklahoma get hit with the grad transfer bug, it's usually, taking advantage of it, whether it be wide receiver or quarterback. Trey Sermon was a guy that was expected to not only contribute, but get a heavy amount of carries for Oklahoma in 2020, and he's a Buckeye now, right? So I found that to be as more interesting than anything else because we talked about, would you take, 2 quarterbacks that are both high-profile blue-chip dudes in the same class? And I'm going, if you can get 3 running backs and one of them's a 5-star and one of them's a 4-star, one of them's a 3-star, you do that because, yeah, you could end up with Joe Mixon. You could also end up with Kennedy Brooks, right? 2 guys that were on the opposite ends of the spectrum when we're talking about recruiting rankings, and both guys that ended up being absolute players because injuries, right? Or because getting into trouble, right? Joe Mixon gets into trouble. Kennedy Brooks takes advantage of the Rodney Anderson injury situation and has blossomed into one of the better college running backs in the country. It's just about size and whether or not that's going to translate to the next level because he's just not as big as a Jonathan Taylor. He's not as big as a Chuba Hubbard, right? And Chuba Hubbard by many is not large either, right? He's like 210. Yeah. So I find that to be interesting. I would also lean toward taking 3 running backs if I could get 3 running backs that I liked. I wanted to talk a little bit about the next 5 that we expect to join the first 5, right? Just throwing some names out there. I think we would agree on these, so stop me if you don't agree. Caleb Williams, Christian Leary, Latrell McCutcheon, Mario Williams, and then the 5th I find a little bit, I'm going to say Camar Wheaton because it feels okay. It feels good to say, but SMU has been doing some outstanding things here, particularly when it comes to Camar Wheaton and Stavion Byrd. I'm like, well, how the hell does SMU get in this conversation? And yet they're right there with OU and LSU for both of those guys, in addition to, the likes of Texas. But, Bryce Foster, that's the guy that I was looking for. Yeah, Bryce Foster. So there's 6. What do you think? You think Oklahoma gets upset in any of those where we might say that, OU should have an edge in many of those recruiting races?
Those would be the 5 that I would list. Okay. I think they're in a really good spot with Latrell. I think Bryce Foster, obviously, I've mentioned him a tons of times as the guy that I think Oklahoma needs to land. I think they're in a good position to land. It sounds kind of crazy, but maybe Christian Leary might be the most questionable of that 5,
okay,
right? Because we've heard so many different reports of Alabama saying, okay, we're in a great position, it's between us and Florida, or Florida saying it's between us and Oklahoma, or Oklahoma saying it's us alone, maybe being challenged by Florida. Right. I mean, you just hear so many different things about Leary, and you're like, what the heck is going on? My head's swirling. It's just maybe it's a situation where the guy is just telling everyone kind of what they want to hear to make sure that this recruitment goes on. But of the five, maybe the most uncertain I'm about is Leary because of the varying reports we've heard surrounding his recruitment. That's just my opinion, but at the same time, I still think those five names are in great position and probably will eventually be in this 2021 recruiting class.
So it's interesting that you bring that up, right? Because keeping those balls in the air, trying to keep people guessing, because that's part of the fun of being a recruit, is interesting. But also, could we be looking at a Jansen Dunn situation where a kid doesn't know that he's a take for perhaps the school that he actually wanted to go to, and it just never gets communicated to him? Because that's, the more I think about that situation, the more it's just wild, because you would like to think that anybody that wanted to get you a part of their class would leave no doubt, right, that they want you in the class. And for him, there was at least some doubt because he committed to Oklahoma and then flipped to Ohio State after having a conversation about, oh, cool, then I'm going to go to Ohio State. And I don't begrudge him that, but I wonder if Oklahoma could get beaten that way again for Christian Leary. Like you're talking about all these other schools think that they're in. Okay, how in are you? Are you in like LSU's in on Caleb Williams, or are you in like, I don't know, Ethan Downs is with Oklahoma, to use a lock? You know, like that's fascinating. Would you think that can happen again with any of these five?
Well, you're talking about, are you in like this or in like that? I mean, are you in like Ohio State was in with Jansen Dunn? Like,
there
you literally control that outcome of recruitment, which is fascinating to me. I mean, think about a program where they can say, oh, wait, now we want you in. And the recruiter will say, okay, yeah, that's cool with me, and immediately go over to that program. I mean, that is incredible amounts of power. But I just don't know that any one of those main three programs involved in Leary's recruitment necessarily are playing that game, because I don't know. I'm not saying this with the utmost authority, but at the same time, I'm firmly led to believe that from what I know, Florida and Oklahoma would take that guy yesterday. Right. Alabama, I haven't touched base with too much, but I would assume that when you put on Leary's tape, Alabama coaches would be like, yeah, we would like him as well to go with the guy at Hall. So I don't see something like that happening, but that's why for me it's just that much more intriguing, because I think that Leary controls his destination at this point. I don't know that he's necessarily being walled out by any of his top three or any other program, mind you. So in that aspect of things, Leary could flip his mind in the blink of an eye and just end up at a completely different area than maybe we expected. I think for everyone around this area and everyone listening to this, it's probably Oklahoma. But, I mean, what's stopping Leary, if this is true, to waking up tomorrow and saying, you know what, I want to stay in the state of Florida. I want to be a Florida Gator. I mean, that's what's fascinating to me, and that's why, for me, he's the wild card of that five that we're talking about.
Yeah, man, I look at Alabama, though, and I'm thinking of anybody that needs to pull out stops, right, and get a few wins going, it would be Alabama, right? Because they're kind of in that same boat as A&M and Oklahoma right now, in that you're staring up going, wait a second, aren't we supposed to be in the top 10? What the hell is Tennessee doing at number 3, right? What's North Carolina doing at 2? Now, what's Iowa doing in the top 10 along with Minnesota? And yet Nick Saban has shown, given an opportunity toward the end of this thing, he's going to show up in somebody's living room and he's going to steal your girl. Like, so as much as I want to be like, yeah, Alabama needs a win, I think they do, one, for the fan base, and two, just to get other recruits involved in what they're doing, the guys they actually want, right? The guys they really, really want in the worst way. I'm also going, probably behooves Florida or Oklahoma to win that kid early, and try to hold on to him as much as you can, because one of the things that I think we haven't hit on enough is how good Dennis Simmons has been about making sure that, one, he gets the guys he wants, and two, those guys stay in the boat, right? We don't really hear a whole lot about dudes that flip their commitment to somewhere else or reopen and don't come back. I mean, Theo Weiss reopened, he's back. You also would think about RJ Henderson, but I mean, that was another issue altogether, right? I mean, that guy ends up at Jacksonville State, and I don't even think Jacksonville State has a football program anymore. Yeah, after Under Armour All-America, because he goes to Florida and then ends up, yeah. So it's an interesting question about who actually controls recruiting, as you pointed out with Ohio State, because I think that's a really fascinating question, right? Who has all of the mojo right now? Do you think, Tennessee has something that Alabama can't go get? Like they decide they want to go get Dylan Brooks, who is out of Roanoke, in Alabama and Hanley, and they decide they just want that in, I think they can go do it. I think they'll go get Terrence Lewis if they want it as well. And that should not terrify you if you're a fan of somebody else, but perhaps infuriate you, right? Because your coaches aren't that good. Like, that's all I can come up with, right? Is you weren't that good at convincing this dude that this is the best place for him to be. Either for reasons that are beyond your control, the way that people feel about Dax Hill going to Michigan, or because you just didn't recruit him as hard as you probably should have because he'd been committed the whole time, a la Jace McClellan and or Jay Boulware. So I'm interested, as we close this thing out, what do you think? Do you think that it matters who gets to actually pull a kid out from under you because they control recruiting the way Ohio State did with Oklahoma?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely matters. I think to talk about all this is what is really fascinating to me about this specific recruiting cycle when we're talking about the pandemic and how that sort of determined the routes of these kids. Look, right now, we can talk all we want about Tennessee and North Carolina being at the top of the 24/7 sports class rank. But at the same time, I mean, we're 200-plus days away from National Signing Day, and Miami of Ohio is towards the top.
Nebraska's
so
top 20.
Everyone relax. Yeah, like they're up there,
Rutgers
up
is top 20,
so,
excuse me. Like, it's like, what?
Bro, if you see Miami of Ohio towards the top of the recruiting rankings, you should immediately tell yourself, okay, I should calm down. Like, everything's going to be okay. Because for this reason and this reason alone is why I am not immediately going to put all my chips on the table in favoring Tennessee or North Carolina.
Okay.
You still got to play the season.
Right.
You still have to play the game of football. And
right.
That's why, in my opinion, programs like Alabama or maybe in Auburn, they're playing the slow game. Look, right now it's favoring all the teams that know how to do the glitz and glam, the social media, and they know how to sell. But for me, Tennessee right now reminds me so much, RJ, so much of Texas A&M a few years ago when they joined the SEC and they started landing like 2 or 3 top 5 classes because they were like, look, we have a ton of money and we have big stadiums. So naturally we look good, right? But you still got to go on the field. You still got to play Alabama. And that's where things start to derail when you talk about these early commitments and recruiting classes. So that's why, in my opinion, Alabama would still take O'Leary tomorrow, but they also know, hey, we can get our pickings later down the line once North Carolina or Tennessee or what have you has to actually go out there and prove the product that they're putting out. So in my opinion, this has been a very fascinating thing to follow when you talk about, is it important? Yeah, it's important because at the end of the day, the programs that not only have the stuff to talk about, but the product to back it up, those are the programs who win. That's why, in my opinion, I'm buying Ohio State. I'm not necessarily buying North Carolina, Tennessee, because Alabama, Auburn, all those others, they're still going to be hot on their heels once the season eventually rolls in.
That's Colin Kennedy coming in strong to finish this thing out. Follow him on Twitter at ckennedy247. It's ckennedy247. Read his work on OUinsider.com. It's about to get on and popping, people. Like, I've had to tear up things that I've written 3 times in the last 2 days because I'm getting new information all the time. And you can check out the VIP board where Brandon keeps it on and popping. Colin is right there with the 2021 and 2022 kiddos and updating us on what they're up to. And yeah, I think he's on to something when you're talking about you still got to play the games. Colin, thanks so much, man.
Appreciate you.
Right, brother.